5 radon myths that we're going to talk about. The first is that radon itself is not dangerous. And in a way, that's true. Gas, we breathe in and out of our lungs, but it's what it inevitably leaves in its wake, which are radioactive heavy metals, including radioactive lead, deposited on surfaces and in the air in the environment. The second is that risk estimates are exaggerated to scare people. Well, if you have ever wondered about your radiation exposure from Fukushima and you live in the United States, or if you've ever wondered about risks from pesticides on apples, then you need to be really, really concerned about risk from radon. That's the second myth. The third is that the underground miners all smoked, so that data is useless. Wrong. Over 2,000 underground miners never smoked. That's the third myth. The fourth is an extension of a study demonstrating that there were no more lung cancers in high radon counties. And one of the limitations is the word county, looking at county-wide radon concentrations and county-wide smoking rates. And along with that is the myth that, well, my neighbor tested low, so I don't need to worry or measure. So that discusses the fourth myth. And then finally, hormesis. So the idea of hormesis makes sense, which is that an injury or insult to your body stimulates the immune system and therefore you're stronger. Well, maybe that's true in some cases. It's definitely not true in the case of radon exposure because we're talking about alpha particles, and alpha particles are like the Mack trucks of radiation exposure. So that's the last myth that we'll talk about. Okay, now let's talk about risk. So first of all, the major thing about risks from radon exposure is that it's based on human exposure. In most cases, all we've got are rodent experiments. We can't go out there and expose people to dioxins, expose people to mercury. No, all we've got are rodents. But in the case of radon risk, they're actually very unusually based on human exposures, a large set of human exposures. So when you're worried again about PCBs, they're based on animal studies. So that's the first advantage in terms of the reliability associated with radon risk, is that it's based on human beings. The second is that it's based on thousands of human beings, unfortunately, exposures. So it's one of the best characterized risks of all the different risks that EPA regulates. So for example, what about genetically modified organisms? Well, there's never been any demonstrated risk, even to animals. I mean, I'm not saying it's a great thing, but let's just put things in perspective. The other issue is about smoking. The human resources people at these mines tracked the miners' health because, of course, they were gathering exposure data to try to keep these miners as safe as possible. So they knew whether they were smokers or not. So it was analyzed to control for the huge risk, of course, of lung cancer caused by smoking. The estimates are very conclusive. About 140,000 people a year die from lung cancer, and about 120,000 of those are due to smoking. And that leaves a big gap for what you would expect, which is that a very serious radiation exposure to the linings of your lungs would give you cancer. And it's not just the EPA. The Centers for Disease Control, the American Lung Association, the American Medical Association, they're fully behind the risks of up to 21,000 deaths a year. Then there's another issue about risk, which is threshold. So non-cancer risks, such as asthma, may have a threshold below which there's no risk. But cancer risks in general, cancer, not asthma or burning throat or acute risks, but cancer risks are generally treated as linear, no threshold, with any exposure, however minor, increasing your risk. And this makes sense too. Risks are multiplicative. So if you're a smoker, then you've already got damage to your lung. And then, of course, by putting radioactive lead in there that's emitting alpha particles, you're going to increase your risk even more because you're already damaged, and those alpha particles can damage even more an already damaged lung lining. So just to look specifically at some numbers, there were 6 groups of mine workers studied in the Beer 6 report, and medical records provided evidence of admitting to smoking. Some used to smoke, but 2,600 never smoked. And the Colorado Plateau miners showed multiplicative effects of smoking and radon exposure. So it isn't just a theory, that effect was shown. And this is the group that reported that they never smoked. And you could see the average working level month, which is a measure of the decay product exposure for a month of working time. The relative risk, like relative to how many would have gotten lung cancer without any radon exposure at all. As the average working level month goes up, the relative risk also goes up. So it's very, very clear there's no reason to suppose that there isn't a linear no threshold model based upon this data. Now let's talk about this Dr. Bernard Cohen study. And this study is termed an ecological study, which looks at radon concentrations, first of all, not exposures, and lung cancer by county. And we all know exposure happens everywhere you live and are during your whole lives, not just in the county where you died. So that's one of the first limitations of this, is it only looks county by county, not individual person, and not exposure, just radon concentrations. So in addition to the radon concentration being general average by county, the smoking data is similarly not person specific, but it's whole county smoking data. So that's like saying on average, if your neighbor smokes, then you smoke, which is just like radon concentrations, where that's actually not true at all. And then there were other factors that were included in the study: income, gender, because more men tend to smoke. But all of these were county specific, not person specific. So this is a major limitation of this study. And of course, we know that the average concentrations in an entire county is not the same as even the average exposure in the entire county. This is a picture of DeKalb County, Atlanta radon concentrations, just to show you how variable radon concentrations are from location to location within one county, and how it's difficult to draw any generalizations county-wide from individual radon concentrations to say these are representative of the entire county. In addition, the average radon concentrations only went up to 6 picocuries per liter. The range was between 1 and 6 picocuries per liter, and only 36 of the counties had concentrations greater than 4 picocuries per liter. Epidemiologists call this kind of study an ecological fallacy, and it's really the primary problem with estimating risk, is because it occurs due to factors that you encounter in your whole life, wherever you are. So this study that has these limitations found less cancer in counties with higher average concentrations only. So even assuming that there is this inverse relationship, it is only true for counties with average concentrations less than about 3 picocuries per liter. And then after correcting for smoking, this much criticized inverse relationship is limited to counties that have average countywide concentrations less than 1.5 picocuries per liter. So they're saying that, okay, if you're less than 1.5 picocuries per liter, and maybe outdoor concentrations, keep in mind, are half a picocurie per liter, so you say the average concentration in the whole county is 1.5 picocuries per liter, then you have a more lung cancer risk than those counties where the average concentration was 1 picocurie per liter. You're really down in even the measurement error of the instruments at that point. Okay, finally, this is my favorite one. Everybody's heard of radon spas. People go to radon spas to expose themselves to radon concentration to improve their health. The theory of hormesis is that a small insult to our immune system makes us stronger. And in theory, this makes a lot of sense, of course. It's just like tough love for your children, right? So the idea is that the immune system is boosted when there's been an insult to make that immune system wake up and do something. Well, okay, so maybe for gamma radiation, which are fast X-rays, this could happen because for gamma radiation, it's a one-hit damage. Gamma radiation for high energy gammas really can go pretty far without interacting and causing any damage. And the damage generally is a one-hit damage. In other words, it's not hitting multiple points in the DNA or other matter that it's hitting. The radiation from radon and its decay products are alpha particles, and in general, alpha particle damage is 20 times more than damage caused by an X-ray. Alpha particles plow into mass like a truck, damaging multiple points in the DNA and RNA, making it difficult for the cell to recover. So how's it going to get stronger if it's smashed dead? Okay, a lot of times we get lost in the controversy around something. So, okay, fine. So say 21,000 deaths a year is too high. Even the critics say that their lower bound in general is about 10,000 deaths a year. 10,000 deaths a year from living in a sea of radioactive material that we don't have to. And then let's talk about hormesis. So a little bit is good for you. Okay, fine. Maybe that works for gamma rays. It doesn't apply to the Mack trucks of alpha particles because of the multiple hit damage that it does to cells. Dr. Bernard Cohen's study was an ecological study, which comes with its own very serious limitations, and it was county only, not individual, for counties where the concentrations on average were less than about 1.5 picocuries per liter. Not talking about what we're really after, which is reducing radon exposures greater than about 4 picocuries per liter. Definitely more exposure is more risk. So please, let's find these homes where there is a very serious risk so people can stop breathing so much radioactive polonium and lead. I would like to finish by reminding everybody of the story of Dr. Snow in London, I think in about 1850. He noticed that when there was a cholera outbreak, people around certain wells got sick, and then he was wondering about the transmission of the disease, and he actually was the first epidemiologist because he mapped the cholera outbreaks and realized that the cholera was being spread by people who got their water from particular wells. And of course, at the time, nobody believed him because nobody knew anything about microscopic germs. And they didn't know they had to wash their hands between surgeries, for example. And of course, poor Dr. Snow died drunk and in the streets of London, and now we know he was totally right. So when we look back and we say, oh my God, how could they have thought if you're operating on a patient and you've got blood all over your hands, maybe you should wash your hands before you operate on the next patient? And we say like, God, how could they have not have thought of that? That's what we're doing right now. We're all living in a sea of radioactive materials that we don't have to be. And people 200 years from now are going to look back and say, what was wrong with them? They had great measurement devices, and it was a relatively easy fix. So let's not die drunk in the street. We have scientific evidence to back us up. We need to reduce this unnecessary radiation exposure.